The wind crawled low across the empty plains, carrying the faint cry of a newborn like a prayer lost between heaven and dust. Eli McRae rode through the gray dawn with his coat buttoned wrong, hat pulled low, and eyes that hadn't slept in 3 nights. The child in his arms whimpered weakly, her small face pressed into his shirt, her breath shallow as if she were apologizing for existing. Every hoof step echoed in his chest like a heartbeat he didn't deserve to have. His wife Lila had died birthing her, just 2 weeks ago, and the cabin still smelled of her hair oil and death. The milk had dried. The baby had not stopped crying. So he rode. The world was colorless. Snow lay in strips across the prairie, fence posts like gravestones marking the road to nowhere. Eli had knocked on every door he passed. "Please, my baby needs milk," he'd say. But the answers were the same, downcast eyes, frightened hands clutching shawls. "Ain't got none, Mr. McRae. You should try town." They said it kindly, but what they meant was don't bring your grief here. His horse, tired and steaming, clopped past the church at the town's edge, where the bell hadn't rung since last summer. In the distance, smoke rose from a single chimney on the hill. The old Hollister place. Folks said Martha Hollister hadn't spoken to anyone but God in years. Her husband and baby had died in a fever when she was young, and the world had gone quiet around her ever since. Some called her a witch. Others said she just refused to die. He stopped outside her gate, heart pounding like he was about to rob a grave. The baby's tiny fingers brushed his neck, warm and trembling. Eli swallowed, his throat dry from the cold and from begging. Then he knocked. The door opened slow. A tall woman stood there, silver hair braided back, face lined with sun and years. Her shawl was the color of smoke and her eyes were clear blue, sharp, alive, curious. She looked at him, at the bundle in his arms, and then past him to the empty horizon, as if trying to place him somewhere among her memories. "I'm sorry to trouble you," Eli said, voice low. She's hungry. I don't got milk. Not even a drop." He held out the child like a confession. Martha's face softened. Her hand trembled as she reached to pull back the blanket. The baby whimpered, her lips searching. "How old?" Martha asked. 2 weeks. Her mama's gone." Something flickered behind the woman's calm eyes, a pain so old it barely showed itself anymore. She opened the door wider. "Come in." Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar and ashes. A fire cracked gently in the hearth. The walls were lined with shelves of jars, roots, beans, folded linens. Time had stopped here quietly. Eli stood awkwardly in the center, hat still in hand, boots dripping meltwater on the floorboards. "Sit," she said. He obeyed. She took the baby with both hands, the way someone handles a lost thing finally found. For a moment she just looked at the child, lips trembling but not speaking. Then, without hesitation, she sat near the fire and loosened her blouse. Eli turned his face away out of instinct and shame, the fire painting his cheeks red. The sound that followed, a soft, desperate suckling, was the first living thing he'd heard in days that didn't sound like sorrow. Martha closed her eyes. The room grew still, except for the crackle of the fire and the small noises of life returning. "It's been a long time," she whispered. Eli said nothing. The wind outside tapped gently at the window, as though reminding them both of how small and brief warmth could be. When the baby finished, Martha wrapped her carefully in a wool blanket and handed her back. Eli looked down at his daughter, her cheeks no longer gray but pink from feeding. He wanted to thank the woman, but no words came. He could only manage, "You saved her." Martha shook her head. "No, just fed her. That's all." He rose, intending to leave before the shame of being pitted swallowed him whole. But the baby stirred again, restless. Her small cry pierced the silence. Martha reached out instinctively, her voice suddenly firm. "You'll stay till she's full again. The cold's too cruel to tempt twice." Eli hesitated. He was a man used to doing everything alone. But something in her tone, like a mother who'd forgotten she once was one, made him nod. She motioned to the fire. "Sit. You're shaking." He sat again, clutching his hat in both hands. For the first time in weeks, the weight in his chest shifted. Martha tended to the kettle, her movements deliberate and quiet, like a prayer being whispered into the world. The baby slept against Eli's arm, the faint smell of milk and wood smoke mingling in the air. When Martha turned back, the lamplight caught her eyes, and for an instant Eli saw what she'd been before the years took her, strong, radiant, and aching to be needed. She noticed his gaze and turned quickly away, busying herself with the fire. They didn't speak for a while. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was warm like the space between two heartbeats. As the night deepened, Eli dozed in the chair, baby curled on his chest. Martha watched them from her rocker, face soft in the amber light. The fire's glow brushed her silver hair, and for the first time in decades she smiled without realizing it. But then came a sound, a faint knock at the frosted window. She turned sharply. Outside, the deputy's lantern bobbed in the dark. His face half hidden by his scarf, he peered through the glass and frowned, seeing the widower asleep and the woman inside. The gossip would start before morning. Martha's smile faded. She blew out the lamp, leaving only the hearth to glow in the dark. In the dim light, Eli stirred and whispered half in a dream, "She's breathing easy now, thank God." Martha looked at the baby, at her tiny fist opening and closing, and then toward the door where the deputy's shadow still lingered. Her heart beat fast, not from fear but from the return of something she thought long buried, the ache of being seen again and the danger that came with it. Outside, the wind rose, scattering snow against the window. Inside, two souls, one young and shattered, one old and forgotten, waited for morning to decide what the world would make of them. The baby stirred again, a small sound like a sigh. Martha leaned closer and whispered, "Hush now, little one. Tomorrow's already whispering that." And in that fragile quiet, the world seemed to hold its breath, not knowing whether it was witnessing the beginning of redemption or the start of another heartbreak. Dawn arrived pale and trembling, washing the cabin walls in silver. Martha stirred first, her bones crackling like thawing ice as she rose from the chair. The embers in the hearth whispered, the kind of low, living sound that keeps loneliness at bay. Eli was still asleep near the fire, his hat over his eyes, the baby on his chest. For a moment Martha only watched them. She had not seen such peace on another face in years, nor felt it linger in her home. The warmth of their presence unsettled her, a tenderness she feared might crumble if named aloud. She moved quietly, tending the fire, setting the kettle to boil. The scent of smoke and pine filled the air. Eli woke slowly, blinking into the soft light. His voice was rough. "I should be going. You've done more than I had any right to ask." Martha didn't turn. "She'll need feed-in soon. And it's colder today than yesterday. Roads ice by noon." He stood, towering awkwardly in her small kitchen, his boots heavy on the floor. "Don't mean to impose." She met his gaze at last. "It ain't an imposition, Eli McCrae. It's a need. And sometimes that's the only thing worth answering." Her words landed in him like something half forgotten, a kindness that asked for nothing in return. He nodded, uncertain, then busied himself splitting logs outside. Through the frosted window, Martha watched his strong back bend with each swing of the axe. There was grief in the rhythm, a wordless sorrow turned into labor. She recognized it. Once she'd lived the same way. By afternoon, the baby had fed again, her cheeks flushed with life. Martha wrapped her in a quilt she'd sewn decades ago, faded violets embroidered along the edge. "She'll have her mother's eyes," Martha murmured, mostly to herself. Eli, wiping his hands clean, hesitated at the door. "Her name's Clara," he said softly. "After my ma. Thought maybe it'd bring her luck." Martha smiled faintly. "Then we'll make sure it does." But peace in the Wild West never stayed long. Word of Eli's visits began to spread quicker than prairie fire. By the third morning, Deputy Klein rode up the hill, his horse steaming in the cold. He dismounted, boots crunching in the snow, and rapped on Martha's door. Eli answered, holding Clara. "Morning, Deputy." "Mornin', Dot." Klein's eyes flicked past him, landing on Martha tending the fire. "Town's wonderin' why you been out here so much. Ain't proper folks say." Eli's jaw tightened. "She's feedin' my child. That's all." Klein scratched his beard. "Maybe so. But gossip don't much care for truth. Best you keep distance for both your sakes." Martha looked up sharply, her voice steady but quiet. "Let them talk. If a hungry child makes tongues wag, it's their souls need mendin', not mine." The deputy's gaze softened. "You're a good woman, Miss Hollister. But this town's cruel when it's bored." He tipped his hat and left. When the door closed, silence filled the room like smoke. Eli shifted uneasily. "I don't want trouble comin' on you." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Trouble don't scare me much anymore. Loneliness does." That confession hung in the air, fragile, dangerous. Eli looked at her then, really looked, and saw past the gray hair and worn dress to the strength beneath. She'd been living half alive, same as him. That evening he repaired her porch rail and fixed the door hinge without being asked. She made stew, the kind that filled the cabin with the smell of time and memory. When they ate, it was in comfortable silence. The baby lay in a cradle of Martha's making, her tiny hand curled like a secret promise. You ever think of leaving this place? Eli asked suddenly. She smiled faintly. Once. Long time ago. But I figured God must have left me here to keep the light burning, for someone wandering in the dark. Looks like he finally sent one. He looked down, ashamed of the tears that threatened. I don't deserve that kind of mercy. No one does, she replied. That's why it's mercy. Outside, the sky deepened to violet, the first stars trembling awake. In that soft quiet, Martha felt something shift inside her, a stirring not of romance but of belonging. The ache of years eased, replaced by purpose. She was needed again. Days passed like pages turning. Eli came each morning with wood or feed, stayed through the baby's cries and left after sunset. The town's whispers grew sharper. Mrs. Dalton, the preacher's wife, stopped Martha on her way from the well one afternoon. You're old enough to know better, Mrs. Dalton hissed, eyes narrowing. He's a young man grieving. Folks think, well, they think you've taken advantage. Martha's cheeks flushed, though her voice stayed calm. If helping a hungry child sin, then I'll gladly be damned. Mrs. Dalton's lips thinned. You'll regret it. Towns don't forget scandal. She turned, skirt sweeping frost. Martha stood frozen for a long time, the bucket handle biting into her hand. For the first time, shame threatened to creep in. The whispers weren't just cruel, they were infectious. That night, Eli noticed her quietness. Something happened? She shook her head, but her eyes were distant. People see what they want, Eli, not what is. He reached across the table, rough hand covering hers. Let him talk. I don't know him truth they won't believe. Her lips trembled, caught between gratitude and fear. You'll lose friends. I already buried the only one that mattered, he said softly. The words cracked something in her chest. Tears welled, unbidden. She turned away quickly, pretending to stir the fire. You should go before dark. He hesitated, then stood, holding Clara close. I'll be back at dawn. She'll be hungry again. When the door closed behind him, Martha sank into her chair, staring at the fire's last glow. The shadows on the wall flickered like ghosts of her past, the husband she buried, the infant she lost. And now, the weight of another child she'd come to love as her own, bound by neither blood nor permission. Outside, the wind began to howl, slapping against the shutters. Martha rose, crossed to the cradle, and looked down at the baby's sleeping face. They'll never understand, she whispered. But maybe understanding ain't what saves us. Her voice caught in the hush. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled, slow and uncertain, like a warning. Martha's gaze drifted toward the window, where a faint light flickered on the horizon, too steady for lightning, too low for a star. Someone was riding up the hill again. The baby stirred, tiny lips parting. Martha pressed a hand to her chest, breath trembling. Whoever was coming, it would not be with kindness this time. The sound of hooves broke the stillness long before the knock came. Martha stood by the window, fingers clutching the edge of the curtain, her heart caught somewhere between dread and duty. Outside, lantern light swayed through the fog like a lost soul searching for home. Eli wasn't due till morning, and no one else had reason to climb this hill after dark. The knock came firm, deliberate. When she opened the door, Mrs. Dalton stood there with two other women, their shawls drawn tight against the cold. Their faces gleamed pale in the lamplight, righteous, sharp, unbending. "Evenin', Miss Hollister," Mrs. Dalton said, voice polite but slick with purpose. "We thought we'd pay a visit. The Lord's been restless about your situation up here." Martha didn't move aside. "The Lord can speak to me himself if he's got words to say." The second woman gasped. "You forget your place, Martha. You're harboring sin under this roof." Her jaw tightened. "There's no sin in feeding the hungry." Mrs. Dalton's gaze slid past her, finding the cradle near the fire. "Ain't the baby that concerns us. It's the man. A young widower and an old widow. What do you expect decent folk to think?" Martha's voice cracked, the first sign of anger she'd shown in years. "I expect them to think less and help more." The women exchanged looks. One murmured, "Shame on you." Then, as quickly as they came, they vanished into the mist, leaving the door half open and the night pouring in like judgment. Martha stood frozen. The words had cut deep, not because they were true but because they touched the wound she'd spent decades stitching shut. Once, long ago, she'd been whispered about too, a young widow who'd lived while her baby hadn't. Folks had called her cursed then, and now they called her worse. She turned to the fire, whispering to herself, "God forgive them. They know not what hunger makes a person do." When morning came, Eli returned, his shoulders dusted with frost, Clara bundled tight in his arms. He saw at once the heaviness in Martha's eyes. What happened? Visitors, she said simply. The kind that don't come for coffee. He frowned. Dalton again? Martha nodded. They came to tell me Shames moved in with me. Eli set Clara in her cradle and crossed the room. You listened to him? Her eyes met his, clear, trembling and fierce. I listened. Didn't agree. He looked at her for a long moment, then exhaled. I can take Clara to town for feed-in? Don't want him hutting your name more. She laughed bitterly. My name's been buried long before you came, Eli McCrae. Ain't nothing left to protect. His expression softened. Then let me protect you. The words hung in the air, raw and impossible. Martha turned away, shaking her head. Don't make promises born from pity. It ain't pity, he said, voice rough. It's respect. You saved my child. You saved me. She didn't answer. She busied herself stirring the stew, though her hands trembled. He stepped closer, his presence warm, steady. Martha, he said gently, you ever think maybe you were meant to save more than one life? That question broke her silence more than any accusation could. She looked at him, not as a man or a neighbor, but as a reflection of her own loneliness wearing a different face. The air between them shimmered with something too fragile to name. By midday the cabin felt smaller, the whispers heavier. Eli mended the fence while Martha washed linens by the stream. The world around them was silent except for the trickle of water and the sigh of wind through the pines. When she bent to rinse a cloth, she saw her reflection in the icy current, creased, silver-haired, but alive in a way she hadn't been in decades. Footsteps behind her. She turned. Eli stood watching, the baby in his arms. Town's getting loud, he said quietly. Klein told me they're saying the preacher might send someone to investigate. Investigate what? She asked, straightening slowly. He hesitated. Our decency. Her heart sank. The baby cooed, oblivious to the cruelty of grown mouths. Martha reached out, her fingers brushing the child's cheek. She don't care what they call us, Eli. She only knows who keeps her warm. He nodded, jaw set. Then let's make sure she stays that way. They returned home as the sky dimmed to amber. The fire was low, the cabin still. Martha fed Clara again, her voice humming an old lullaby that cracked halfway through, the words half lost to memory. Eli sat across from her, staring into the fire, the flames reflecting in his tired eyes. Martha, he said finally, what if I built you a new crib here in the corner by the window? That way she could see the light in the mornings. She smiled faintly. You plan on staying that long? He didn't smile back. If you'll have me. Her hands paused, her body stilling like the fire's last flame. Eli, you don't know what you're skinned at. Yes, I do. She shook her head slowly. You're a man with years still ahead. I'm half buried already. What'll folks say when they see you with me? He rose, crossing the room. His voice dropped low, almost a whisper. They'll say what they always do. But I'll sleep fine knowing my daughter's fed and the woman who saved her ain't alone anymore. Something in his tone, steady, resolute, made her chest tighten. She looked away, blinking against the warmth stinging her eyes. Before she could speak, a loud thud rattled the window. Both turned. A rock rolled across the floor, leaving a trail of snow. Wrapped around it was a piece of paper. Eli picked it up, unwrapping it carefully. The note inside read in scrawled ink, Sinners belong outside God's mercy. Leave before you bring his wrath. Martha's face drained of color. Eli's fist crumpled the paper. He moved to the door, but she caught his arm. Don't. That's what they want. To see you fight. To prove their story right. He breathed hard, chest rising and falling. How long do we stay quiet before it eats us alive? Her voice softened. Until the Lord himself says otherwise. He turned toward her, eyes burning with something between rage and devotion. Then I'll wait beside you till he does. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken things. The baby whimpered and Martha lifted her, pressing her to her chest. The sound of feeding filled the room, slow and rhythmic. Outside, the wind carried faint voices, men laughing, distant, cruel. Eli stood guard at the window, every muscle taut. He'd faced coyotes, droughts, and death itself, but never the kind of cruelty that dressed itself in righteousness. He watched the night like it might strike. Martha rocked the baby gently. They'll tire of this, she whispered. They always do. He looked over his shoulder. And if they don't? Her eyes met his. Then maybe God's testin' whether we'll stand in love or hide in fear. The words settled in him like seed in soil. He exhaled slowly, nodding once. Then I reckon I'll stand. Outside, the laughter faded into wind. Inside, the fire dimmed to embers, painting their faces in shades of quiet defiance. The baby sighed between them, her tiny heartbeat the only sound that mattered. Then, another sound. A creak. The barn door outside. Eli's head snapped up. Martha froze mid-rock. Through the window's frost, a flicker of lantern light moved near the stables. Someone was out there, too close, too quiet. Eli reached for his coat, voice low. Stay here. Martha clutched the baby tighter, whispering, Eli, don't go. But he was already at the door, jaw set against the cold. He opened it to the wind, and the darkness swallowed him whole. Martha stepped to the window, heart pounding. The lantern light outside vanished. Then came a single sound, a crash sharp and sudden. The baby stirred, beginning to cry. Martha whispered a trembling prayer, her breath fogging the glass. Lord, bring him back to the light. And somewhere beyond the snow, a man's voice shouted, not in pain but in warning. The night was about to turn. The wind outside screamed through the pine trees, carrying the sound of Eli's voice as it vanished into the black. Martha stood frozen at the window, the baby clutched tight to her chest, her breath shallow and uneven. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes swirling in the lantern glow that flickered faintly from the barn. She couldn't see him anymore, only shadows and the low groan of timber shifting under cold. Fear, sharp and old, crawled up her spine. She had lost one man to the night long ago, she would not lose another. Setting the baby in her cradle, she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside. The wind hit her like a slap, wild, icy, alive with judgment. Eli, she called, voice trembling but fierce. No answer, only the creak of the barn door moving in the wind. She waded through the snow, her skirt dragging like an anchor. Inside the barn, the air was thick with smoke. A broken lantern lay overturned, its flame licking up the straw. The horses kicked in panic, their cries high and desperate. Eli was near the stall, trying to beat back the fire with his coat. His face glowed red in the flickering light. Martha, get back, he shouted. She ignored him, grabbed a pail and tossed snow into the flames. Sparks burst, lighting her shawl for a second before dying. She coughed hard, her lungs burning. You can't fight it alone, she rasped. Then get the baby out of the house, he yelled, swinging his coat again. If the fire spreads. But before he could finish, a wall beam cracked, falling between them. The crash threw sparks into the air. Martha stumbled back, shielding her face. Through the smoke, she saw him kneeling, trapped on the other side. Eli. He coughed, waved her off. Go. Now. But she didn't move. Instead, she ran outside, grabbed the water barrel from the porch and dragged it to the doorway. The fire roared like an animal behind her. Her muscles screamed as she tipped it over the threshold, the freezing water hissing into steam. Eli pushed through the haze, his sleeve smoldering. He caught her by the shoulders, shaking. You could have died. Her eyes blazed. So could you? I've buried enough ghosts, Eli McCrae. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The wind tore at them, the smell of smoke clinging to their skin. Then he pulled her against him, chest rising fast. She felt his heartbeat through the fabric, wild and real. In that moment, something shifted. Fear gave way to fierce understanding. They weren't two lost souls anymore. They were what stood between each other and the world. A shout broke the moment. Figures appeared at the edge of the property, 3 men with lanterns moving fast through the snow. Townsfolk. One held a rifle slung over his shoulder. Fire, one shouted. You'll burn the valley down, McCrae? Eli stepped forward, hands raised. It's under control. Looks like sin's under control too, the man spat back, eyes sliding toward Martha. Preacher says the Lord's wrath ain't far. Folks talk of cleansing. Eli's face hardened. You take another step toward this house, I'll forget I'm a God-fearing man. The man with the rifle smirked. Ain't you already forgot livin' with her? Martha's heart twisted. The fire crackled behind her, echoing the heat of humiliation under her skin. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the storm. If you've come to burn my home, do it proper. But leave the child out of your hate. The youngest of the men faltered, his lantern shaking slightly. We didn't come to hurt no baby, ma'am. Then you'll turn around, she said, her tone low, trembling with control. Because the only thing alive here tonight is decency, and you've already lost sight of it. The older man opened his mouth to speak, but Eli's stare stopped him cold. Go, Eli said, his voice deep, commanding. Before the Lord starts questioning, which one of us he's ashamed of. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the wind howled and the men turned, disappearing into the snow one by one, their lanterns dimming until they were swallowed by darkness. Martha exhaled, shoulders trembling. Eli turned to her, eyes searching. "You shouldn't have faced them. I've been fastened worse since before you were born," she murmured. "Fear don't die easy, but I ain't feed in it anymore." He looked at her differently now, not as the woman who'd saved his child, but as someone who'd saved him too. The barn still smoked behind them, the faint smell of burnt wood mixing with snow and ash. Together they began pulling the horses out, one by one, their bodies steaming in the cold. By dawn the fire was out. The barn was half gone, but the house still stood. Martha collapsed onto the porch steps, hands blistered, hair streaked with soot. The baby cried faintly inside. Eli sat beside her, silent. The horizon bled gold and gray, dawn spreading over the white world like mercy. "You think they'll be back?" she asked finally. He nodded slowly. "Men like that don't quit easy. But maybe they'll think twice after tonight." She laughed softly, a tired sound. "You don't know this town like I do." He turned to her. "Then maybe it's time it learned something new." Their eyes met again, and for a fleeting second she felt years fall away, the ache of widowhood, the loneliness, the quiet shame. What remained was simple and human, the need to belong, even if only in the heart of one person. Inside, Clara began to wail louder. Martha rose unsteadily. Eli started to follow, but she stopped him with a touch to his arm. "She's fine. Go rest. I'll tend to her." He caught her hand gently, calloused fingers enclosing her thin wrist. "Martha, thank you. For stayin', for fightin' that." She smiled faintly. "I ain't fightin' for me. I'm fightin' for the sound of her cry. Reminds me the world ain't done with hope yet." He nodded, unable to speak, and watched her disappear inside. Later, when the house had quieted, Martha sat by the window with the baby in her arms. The fire burned low and snow drifted sideways across the glass. She hummed softly, an old hymn her mother once sang. Her heart ached, not from fear but from knowing what would come. The town would not forgive what it couldn't understand. The baby stirred, fingers brushing the lace of Martha's collar. "Hush now," she whispered. "Your pa's sleepin'. He's carried too much for one soul." She gazed out at the gray dawn, where the barn's blackened frame stood against the sky. Smoke still curled upward, thin and holy, like a prayer carried by the wind. Behind her the floor creaked. Eli stood there, wrapped in a blanket, face pale but steady. "Couldn't sleep," he said quietly. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Then sit. No one should greet mornin' alone after a night like that." He obeyed. They sat in silence as the baby drifted back to sleep. Light slowly crept into the room, spilling across the wooden floor. It touched Martha's face, turning every wrinkle into something sacred. Eli spoke finally, his voice trembling. "You ever think maybe you were sent here to save me?" She smiled sadly. "No, Eli. I think we were sent to save each other." The words hung in the air, simple and true. For the first time in his life he felt peace, not the peace of having survived but of being seen. Hours later, while the sun climbed higher, a sound echoed faintly from the valley below. Hooves again, steady and numerous. Martha's heart tightened. She stood, moving to the window. A group of riders approached, 5, maybe 6. Their coats dark, hats low. Eli joined her, eyes narrowing. "They're back." She clutched the baby closer. "Not with lanterns this time." "No," he said quietly. "With rifles." The world outside shimmered with morning light, beautiful and cold. Inside, the fire flickered, soft and stubborn. Martha pressed her cheek to the baby's hair and whispered, "Then we'll meet him in the light, not the dark." Eli placed his hand over hers on the cradle, his voice steady. "Whatever comes, we stand." Outside, the riders drew closer, the crunch of hooves breaking the silence like thunder rolling over snow. The house held its breath, every heartbeat poised between fear and faith. And as the first shadow reached the porch, Martha whispered under her breath, "Lord, if you're listenin', let love be the last thing they see." Snow blew sideways across the plain, the riders closing in like shadows born from storm and rumor. Eli stepped onto the porch, rifle steady, breath misting in the air. Inside, Martha stood by the cradle, her shawl wrapped tight, whispering to the baby as if her voice alone could keep the world from breaking. The lead rider halted 10 yards away, lantern light spilling across his face. It was Deputy Klein. His expression was grim, torn between duty and shame. "Eli," he called, "put the gun down. Town's in uproar. They want you both to answer for what they call indecency." Eli's voice cut through the wind. "And you believe him?" Klein shifted uneasily. I believe the barn's burned, tempers are high, and the preacher's calling for order. If you don't come down peaceful, they'll bring fire next time. Martha opened the door, stepping into the pale dawn, her silver hair whipping in the wind. There'll be no peace for those who come with fire in their hearts, she said quietly. Her calm was sharper than a blade. You think the Lord smiles on men who frighten mothers and babes? One of the younger riders spat into the snow. You ain't no mother, ma'am. Folks say you're bewitched, stealin' milk that ain't yours to give. Eli's hand twitched near the trigger, but Martha raised a trembling hand. Stop. They don't need more hate, they've got enough to choke on already. Klein lowered his lantern. Martha, just come with us to town. Let the preacher talk. It'll calm things. Her eyes met his, blue and unwavering. You can't calm men who've decided righteousness belongs only to the young and the pretty. The baby's faint cry broke through the wind. It was small, human, pleading. The sound made the riders stir uneasily. Even men hardened by gossip flinched at the sound of life's innocence. Eli's voice softened but carried steel. You'll not take her where hate sits higher than God. The older rider, the same who'd mocked them the night before, dismounted, stepping forward. If she don't come quiet, we'll bring quiet by other means. Eli raised the rifle, eyes locked on the man. Take one more step and you'll meet mercy's end. Time hung like glass between breaths. Then Klein barked, enough. Nobody's dying over a rumor. He turned to the others. Go home. All of you. But the old rider wasn't finished. He lunged forward, striking Eli's rifle aside. The shot cracked through the air, echoing across the valley. The horses reared, the men shouting. Martha screamed. The bullet shattered the post beside the door, splintering wood inches from her shoulder. Eli swung the rifle like a club, knocking the man to the ground. Eli, stop, she cried. He froze, chest heaving. The man lay stunned in the snow, blood mixing with soot. The baby wailed inside. The riders hesitated, torn between anger and disbelief. Klein dismounted slowly, holding up his hands. No more, Eli. For God's sake. No more. Eli dropped the rifle, the sound dull against the snow. Then make him leave. Klein nodded to the others. Take him, he said, gesturing toward the wounded man. This is done. The riders obeyed reluctantly, dragging their fallen companion away. One of them muttered, ain't over, before disappearing into the storm. When the last hoofbeat faded, silence settled heavy as ash. Martha stood trembling, one hand against the doorframe. You can't stay here now, she whispered. They'll come again, Eli. With more than words. He looked toward the valley where the riders vanished. Then let him. I ain't running. She turned to him, eyes filled with something between grief and admiration. Bravery don't mean stopping death. Sometimes it means protecting life enough to walk away. Eli stepped closer. You're a skin me to leave you? I'm a skin you to live, she said softly. Take Clara. Go north. There's a church in Cottonwood. Father Haynes owes me a kindness. He'll keep you safe. He shook his head. You come too. She smiled faintly, her voice breaking. This is my home, Eli. I've spent 55 years making peace with its silence. Maybe now I finally get to fill it with something good, like your story. He stared at her, eyes burning. I won't. Hush, she said, laying a hand against his cheek. Don't let pride steal what mercy gave you. He closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against hers. You saved me. No, she whispered. You reminded me I was still worth savon. Inside, the baby's cry turned to soft whimpers. Martha lifted her from the cradle, the tiny bundle squirming between them. She's yours to carry, Eli. The world will call her orphan if you let it. Don't. He took the child slowly, reverently. His arms shook. How do I thank you? By remembering, she said, tears spilling freely now. Every time she laughs, you remember a woman who had nothing left but love and gave it anyway. Outside the wind eased. Dawn stretched gold across the snow, painting everything in fragile light. Eli turned toward his horse, the baby held close to his chest. He looked back once. Martha stood framed in the doorway, shawl glowing like silver fire, her hair loose in the wind. You'll freeze if you wait long, she called. He swallowed hard, his voice thick. You'll see us again. Her smile trembled. If the Lord's kind. He mounted, the reins shaking in his hands. The baby cooed faintly, her tiny voice a promise. Martha watched until they vanished down the hill, the sound of hooves fading into quiet eternity. Then she turned, stepping back into the cabin. The fire had nearly died. She fed it one more log, whispering, burn bright now. He'll need your warmth to remember. Hours passed before the next knock came. She knew it before it happened. The rhythm of boots on wood, the weight of the world behind them. The preacher's men. When she opened the door, for stood there, grim and righteous. "We've come to cleanse this place," one said. She looked at them, her face serene. "You're late. The only sin here's already gone." They pushed past her, tearing through the room. One overturned a chair, another kicked the cradle aside. She didn't move, didn't beg. When the fire caught again, her curtains this time, she didn't stop it. Smoke curled upward, warm and golden. As they fled, frightened by the rising flames, Martha walked to the doorway, eyes on the horizon. Through the smoke, she thought she saw a dark figure on horseback far away, Eli turning for one last look. Maybe it was only her heart seeing what it needed to. The roof cracked above her. Sparks fell around like fireflies. She smiled faintly, whispering, "Thank you, Lord, for letting me feel alive before I burned." The flames roared, swallowing the past, the shame, the gossip. By the time the town climbed the hill again, there was nothing left but smoke and snow and silence. Days later, Eli reached Cottonwood. The priest took him in without question. When night came, he sat by the window, Clara asleep against his chest. The wind outside carried the faintest scent of ash and cedar. He closed his eyes, hearing Martha's voice in the distance, calm, strong, eternal. "Love's not what we keep, Eli. It's what we leave behind." He whispered back, "Then you'll live forever." Outside, the snow glowed under moonlight, and the world felt clean again, because somewhere on that lonely hill, a soul had turned its last sorrow into light.